Welcome to the People's Platform, shaping New Zealand's future one conversation at a time. Today, I'm pleased to once again be joined by Dr. David Wilson for another important conversation around New Zealand's economic future. In this episode, we'll be discussing New Zealand's first proposal around the potential to buy back the Bank of New Zealand, what economic sovereignty means in today's global environment. So, David, let's begin with the proposal around the Bank of New Zealand. Why is this conversation becoming important again?
Oh, thank you, Bernadette. Lovely to be with you again. It's really interesting, isn't it? We know that we have a highly oligopolistic banking sector. Oligopolistic means fancy word for a bunch of banks getting together and basically controlling the market. Now, this has a number of outcomes that are not good for us. The economists call it a dead weight on the economy. Essentially what that means is they're slow, they're not as efficient as other banks in similar jurisdictions, and they siphon off around $7 billion a year just in profit that goes to Australia. So at the moment, a lot of the retirement savings investment companies are investing in the banks. So essentially what we're doing in New Zealand is we're supporting their retirees, not ours. So there's a background to all of this anti-competitive behaviour, but there's a fundamental thing here, and I think people will remember this and they'll understand completely, and that is during the global financial crisis, what did governments do? They came out, including our own, and said, banks are too big to fail. So essentially, we guaranteed their success at that point. Now we're in a position where they've been taking so much profit from us, and we sold off our banks in the 90s, ad hoc, and the BNZ was one of them. And now we're in this position where we are subject to this whole oligopolistic behaviour.
So talking about that, for viewers who may not understand the history, can you explain what happened to BNZ and why ownership matters?
Yeah, so the BNZ was struggling a little bit, and actually in the 90s, our government bailed them out because it was our bank. We owned it. And at the time, because it was not going well, there was a whole lot of people that actually wanted to sell the bank, including the Prime Minister at the time, who was a National Party Prime Minister, and we won't talk about him just yet. But that was part of that whole neoliberal thing that we went through in 70s, 80s, 90s, into the early 2000s. And it's still there in our bureaucracy, this kind of leave it to the market, everything will be fine kind of approach. And we sold off a lot of our large assets, including banks. We sold off telecom. We split up the electricity generation and had private investment in there, so we lost some sovereignty there. All different conversations. But when you add these things up, it's not good. At the time, we sold the bank to the BNZ for about $1.75 billion. I don't know the exact number, but from memory, it's around that. And now, if you asked what is the value of the Bank of New Zealand, which should be called the Bank of the National Australia Bank. It's got not much to do with New Zealand other than we use it. There's anything from, if you took, for example, you just added up the net present value from 1.75 billion, you'd land on around 7.5 billion. That's an economic term. So what it was worth then to what it should be worth now. If you look at markets and what some of the people are saying around this, it's 20 to 30 billion. It could also be right in the middle of those two as well. But why are we doing this? Why are we saying we should buy the BNZ back? Many people say, well, why don't we just back Kiwi Bank? The issue we've got is that just under 90% of the banking sector is owned by those four banks. Kiwi Bank is like, is like a add-on. It's between 6 and 7% of the total market. For us to capitalise Kiwi Bank, to make it compete with those four big banks ANZ, BNZ, Westpac, and AS. What was it? And ASB. That would cost an awful amount of money. Not only that, they've got to compete. Now, there's some structural issues because we've had this oligopoly in charge of our banking. I'll give you an example. The other day, I had the Reserve Bank of New Zealand in front of the Finance and Expenditure Committee, which I'm on, and I asked Karen Silk, who's one of the advisors to the Reserve Bank, are we paying too much for our mortgages in New Zealand? The answer came back and she obfuscated a little bit and skirted around the answer and didn't answer it. So I asked it again. Are we paying too much for our mortgages in New Zealand? And she had to say yes. And I can tell you what that is. There's this thing called the net interest margin, the NIM. So the banks borrow money from the Reserve Bank and from overseas at a certain rate, and then they sell it to you for a higher rate. That's the net interest margin is between the two. So they're making a margin between what they borrow at and what they sell you a mortgage at. In New Zealand, it's around about 2.4, 2.5%, that net interest margin. You think about it. The OCR is, what is it at the moment? It's about, what is the OCR at the moment? Brain just gone blank. I think we're 2.25? Yeah. And what does your mortgage cost you? Well, add on 2.5% and you get to where your mortgages are currently at, floating rate and so on and so forth. As a guess, what do you think the net interest margin is in Denmark?
Wouldn't guess. Maybe 1%?
Yeah, not bad. 0.45%. The interesting thing about Denmark is they own a company called Maersk, which is the biggest shipping industry in the world. Their population is less than ours. They have their own bank and they have their own sovereign wealth fund. When you look at Singapore, they have one of the largest sovereign wealth funds in the world. They have their own bank. When you look at Norway, 5 million people, they have the largest sovereign wealth fund in the world. They have their own bank. We don't. We sold them through this neoliberal agenda. So it's we're in this situation now. We're confronted with this oligopoly. How do you break this oligopoly? It is very, very difficult to do because we do not want our banks to fail. They know that. So we've got to have some kind of structural change, something that cuts in and changes the dynamic of the competitiveness in the sector. And that's why Winston came out and said, well, buy back the BNZ so it actually can be the Bank of New Zealand. Yeah.
Talking about sovereignty, what does economic sovereignty actually mean in practical terms for everyday New Zealanders?
Yeah, so it's what we own together as a country, all of our citizens. So, for example, the super fund currently has around $90 billion in it. It's big. And it's there for a purpose. It's there to subsidise the costs of us in our retirement and subsidise the amount that government pays for superannuation. It was originally called the Cullen Fund, so we've got to give ups to Michael Cullen for setting that up. Very smart. Unfortunately, there's been governments of the right and the left, Labour and National, who had not continued to support it because when it was set up, it was meant to be a contribution from government every year to build up the fund so that we could be in a better situation to subsidise superannuation down the line. Anyway, they've done extraordinarily well. Their returns have been very high. One year in particular, I think they got it to around 18% return. So it's just been compounding all of this time, and it will kick in the next few years when the amount of people moving into super becomes greater or becomes larger. So those sovereign funds are absolutely vital for us in terms of our future social and economic well-being, in a nutshell. Now, we've also got ACC specifically for accident compensation Accident Compensation something, ACC, Corporation. The ACC has around, I'm sorry, I don't know the actual number, but it's around 50 billion. And it's not enough. We actually need more than that to subsidise what we need to support people who are out of work and need to be brought back into work. Back to Norway. They found oil. And when they found oil, they decided to set up a company called Statoil, government-owned oil company that refined and sold oil. Government-owned. The profits from that government-owned oil refinery went into a sovereign wealth fund. The sovereign wealth fund today is $1.7 trillion. I'll repeat that. $1.7 trillion. If they have a good year, they're pretty much improving that fund close to our GDP as a whole. There are 5 million people in Norway. There are 5 million people in New Zealand. There is absolutely no reason why we can't rely on our resources and build our sovereign wealth so that we can support all our social and economic development going forward. That's why it's so vital that we do this. We need to increase our savings, our private savings, KiwiSaver, but also our sovereign wealth and our sovereign savings so that we can support the things we want for a better future, a more prosperous nation.
It's so interesting that we can't learn from what happens in other countries. Why do we not look at what other countries are doing and learn from it rather than make so many big mistakes?
You know, when there's a tale of two countries, almost like tale of two cities, Singapore and New Zealand. If you go back to the 50s when Singapore was starting out, there was this wonderful man called Lee Kuan Yew who remained the Prime Minister of Singapore for I don't know how many years. He's still going strong. It's an unbelievable character in his 90s. An amazing person. So at that point, New Zealand provided aid to Singapore. Just think about that for a second. So we were supporting them because they were poor. If you look at Singapore now, especially per capita, they're so far ahead of us, it's ridiculous. So what's the difference? The difference is we went on a crusade in the early 80s around neoliberalism, which was reduce government, let the market decide, having that whole approach. We were right in the middle of selling off our assets because we thought the market could do it better than government, and so on and so forth. Well, Singapore did not go that way at all. They thought about what their resources were, what their opportunities were, and what they could do.
Sorry.
That's all right.
I don't know why my throat is so bad.
And the rest is history, really. Now, per capita, they're way ahead of us. And there's no way that we could. Now we're going to them to ask them how they do it. They have a company in Singapore called Temasek or Temasek. Temasek is like in charge of their sovereign wealth and all of their assets. And it's a very large sovereign wealth fund. They manage it commercially. So they're not just letting their assets go to waste. They're actually working them. And they're providing a huge return to the government too when it needs it. But they're also growing their sovereign wealth as they've done. And we haven't, because we were stuck in this whole neoliberal argument that just leave things to the market. We don't need government involved. Reduce government, sell off our assets. You don't need government in telecommunications. You don't need government in electricity. The market can decide what the price is. Well, crikey. Seriously? Since the Bradford reforms in the 90s, that was the promise, that the market would give us cheaper electricity. Well, everybody, how's that working out for you?
Absolutely. So New Zealand First is committed as well not to sell more assets. Sorry, my voice is not getting good, so I'll let you do most of the talking. Why does New Zealand First believe that greater local ownership of strategic assets is important?
We're in a very complex geopolitical world at the moment, and everybody knows this. So it's really interesting and it's instructive in a way that, when we came into government, the government books were in way worse a situation than we thought. So we found that we've got more debt. Currently, we're paying about $9 billion a year just to repay the debt, just the interest payments that we owe. This is nuts. So that's where we started. So we had to gradually chip away at that and get the books back in order so that we're not spending more than we're earning the whole time. Had to reduce the amount we're spending and increase the amount that we're earning. So that's one thing. Then, unfortunately, we had tariffs, Trump's tariffs. Well, that actually, was not good for our export sector. And our exports keep us afloat, did through the global financial crisis. They do. And that hit us. Nonetheless, after that had happened and it settled down a little, we started to see employment rising again. We started to see house prices leveling off, and we started to see interest rates come down. So all those fundamentals we'd gotten back into place, and we just started to see the economy recovering. And then we had the Iran war and the oil shocks. So it's a double whammy for us. We're actually seeing still confidence in our manufacturing sector and other sectors in New Zealand through all of that. So we can turn this around really, really well, really easily. So your question really was, what does, sovereign wealth or owning our own stuff mean? Well, you imagine this. You imagine if we, all of us in New Zealand, owned the generation of all of our electricity, owned all of our power lines, the main infrastructure. It's like the backbone of how electricity is spread throughout the country. We already do own that. And then you've got these other things called lines companies, which are the small ones that take it from Transpower to your door. And pretty much all of those lines companies are already owned by trusts. So we own them, right? So we already own Transpower, which is the main skeleton. We have these local lines companies that get the stuff to your door. They're owned by trusts, which is us. The gentailers, as they call them, they are called that because they're both generators of electricity and retailers of electricity. They are selling to themselves. And any other retailer that is only retail only, retailing you, those are the people you ring up and say, can you supply me power? They have to buy from the generators, those same four generators, as they sell to themselves. Well, you show me a market that works like that. You show me a market where someone has complete control over the production price of energy and are retailers as well. And then they say, well, we honestly, this is okay. We set the price and everyone pays the same. Well, unfortunately, there are a whole lot of bad incentives in there for them to manage the price up. So, for example, there's just recently been an application by one of the generators to spill water out of the hydro dam because they've got too much water, in inverted commas. Well, what happens when that happens? Well, they spill the water over, and if there's not enough water, then the cost of energy goes up, and everyone has to pay the higher price. They have an incentive to do that. So there's some crazy things in there in the middle of it. So what we're saying is, no, I'm sorry, we're buying back the gentailers, and we're splitting them. So currently the government owns 51% of 3 of the gentailers. It does not own the 4th. If we split the gentailers structurally, which we can legally, that means that the retail side of it will be purely private sector and they'll compete. But the government will have control over the cost of energy for all of those retailers, the wholesale price. Now, you just think, if we were able to supply, and we can because we're one of the best nations in the world for producing renewable energy, hydro, geothermal, They say that we're about 85% plus in renewable energy supply in the world. Other countries are nowhere near that. They're lucky if they're 30% or 40%, and they're having to pay higher prices for, fossil fuel stuff. So we're in such a good position that we can do that. You imagine if we had the cheapest renewable energy in the world to support our homes and our businesses. That would be the best competitive advantage you could ever think of to support our economy. That's why it's so important. This is our public good. Electricity is ours. We built it. Our fathers and forefathers built this infrastructure. We want it back.
And it's like, it's the heart of the country, isn't it? It's like without electricity, you can't do anything. So
it's absolutely fundamental.
Fundamental, absolutely.
Yeah, you look at the steam engine, you look at coal, you look at all of those things. When we got them, industry took off.
So when you look ahead, what do you think are the biggest economic challenges New Zealand must prepare for over the next decade?
From an economic point of view and from our economy point of view, we do need to ramp up in terms of what we export. We currently are at the mercy of commodities and commodity prices with most of our exports, so agriculture, horticulture, wine, so on. However, we do need to add value. But the geopolitical thing is changing, and if you listen to some of the experts that study this stuff, they're saying that we're moving from an American hegemony, sorry for the word, means they're in control of the global economy. They have so much persuasion. It is the biggest economy in the world. We even have the US dollar, which is what everything trades in around the world. Now there are challenges. The renminbi is challenging to the US dollar. And they're saying that we're heading towards what they call a multipolar world. So it's not one block in charge. There's different blocks shoring up themselves. At the basis of all of that, and you've got these Trump's tariffs, have really highlighted this. COVID highlighted this. Our supply chains, where we get our things from, where we get our stuff to support our businesses and support our industry here. We have to import a lot of things. So many nations are now trying to understand how they can shore up their own supply chains and not give them away, and to build up their own resilience in their own economy. Like it's our resources, our people, our businesses, our competitive advantages. We have to concentrate on all of those. And we need to actually make sure that we have the right supplies. Energy is one of them, but anything else that you can think of, so that we can continue and be resilient to any of these kind of global shocks. So we've got to look after ourselves, and we've got to actually have good friends in that. And by good friends, I mean trading partners.
Yeah, I think that with what you've said, it answers my next question, which was why does a strong and resilient New Zealand economy, what does a strong and resilient New Zealand economy look like to you? Yep. So I think you've really answered that. So maybe we'll just go to the last question. Sorry about my voice, and
that's all right.
It's not been terribly great this morning.
I admire you for making it.
I'm a bit of a battler. It's like Clyde said to me, "Are you okay this morning?" And I said, "Yeah, you know me.
Everything's fine.
I'll just keep going." What gives you confidence or hope about New Zealand's future?
Absolutely. Look. We've been here before, and we can do it again. As Winston said, in the 50s, we were one of the top, most advanced nations in the world. We can be that again. I'm sure we can. We've faced so many crises. You think of the global oil shocks in the 70s. We got through that. You think of Britain joining the European Economic Community, the EEC, which is now the EU. When they did that, we were kind of known as Britain's farm. All our exports were going to Britain. And so we had to diversify really fast to ensure that we could actually trade around the world, because Britain was getting closer to Europe, even though they've pulled out now. But we did. We did do that. We were able to diversify our markets and diversify our markets and diversify our products at the same time. We can do that again. We just actually need to come together to do it. Build on our strengths, our people, our resources, our land.
Awesome. Dr. David Wilson, thank you so much for joining us and for your valuable contribution and your wisdom. And I'm sure a lot of people will glean a lot from the answers that you've given us today. And people can always comment and ask more questions, always. So thank you once again. These are complex issues, but they matter deeply because they shape not only our economy, but also the future direction and resilience of our country. Don't forget to subscribe, follow, and share this conversation as we continue shaping New Zealand's future, one conversation at a time.